righty, we are on. Great, welcome everybody. I'd like to call the Monday, March 29th, 2022 school board meeting to order. Lisa, can you call the roll, please?
Inspector Weber?
Here.
Inspector Laliberty?
Here.
Inspector Ahrens?
Here.
Inspector Felton?
Here.
Inspector Walker?
Here.
Chair Diaz?
Here.
And Inspector Roche is absent. That's 6 present at 6 o'clock.
Great, and it's the 28th, right?
Yes.
Not the 29th. School board. I mean, spring break. Please rise. Pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. So, first up is the approval of our meeting agenda and minutes. Looking for a motion to approve our meeting agenda for tonight, as well as the meeting minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting, March 14th, and the regular school board meeting minutes from March 14th, 2022. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Fantastic. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. Fantastic. Starting right off is a quality in action in our reports, and we have Technology Director Paul Brashear here to talk about the technology team. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Now, as I recall, last time I was with you in a meeting, I promised teleportation inadvertently, and I just wanted to start off saying I wasn't able to deliver on that one. Okay, so
We accept your apology.
thank you, I appreciate that. That on?
Yep, you're good.
Great. So I want to give you a brief on technology and where we've been for the past couple of years, and especially how we've evolved over time, especially over the last 2 years of pandemic and where we're heading in some broad terms. I know quite often in quality and action presentations, we bring teachers and kids and whatnot in. It's spring break. So you've just got me today.
You're enough.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Everything starts with mission, with the district's mission, and we build on that, certainly. And our district's mission speaks very clearly to us as a technology department, especially in 2 areas. When we look at regular access to technology for students and families, and then also where we are talking about in our vision, the second point, individualized program services and especially personalized learning. And that is something that speaks to our department fairly strongly. We as a department back in 2016-17 adopted an operational plan to implement personalization of learning through blended learning. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how that impacted our journey into a pandemic as well, and where we are coming out the other side of that. We have our own mission statement, and it's to support, promote, and lead innovation, effectiveness, and an impactful use of technology in broad areas of our department operations, leadership, operations, instruction, and learning. And a lot of our focus has been geared towards the instruction and learning piece of it as well. Just to give you a brief overview of what it looks like by the numbers for our department. And this is current data for us right here. Our customers, you see the numbers there, about 500 staff. I think it's 518 or so, Brady will probably tell me. Students, right around 3,100, and parents and guardians that are also our customers, and they especially became our customers during the pandemic very directly, over 3,800 parents. Parent and guardian access is a big piece for us as well, and we've worked hard towards that. We currently have about 1,900 campus parent accounts. That's our parent portal. And our goal is to have at least one parent with every campus, at least that every student has at least one parent with a parent campus account so that they can access information, keep their information up to date and whatnot. We're a little lagging in that. We're at about 65%, and that's something we continue to work on as we move on. If we talk about the work we do with our customers, just a general number, our support requests, they come into us by phone or by email requests to our help desk. and to our ticketing system, it's about 5,000 support requests per year. That doesn't count the things that happen outside of it, the incidental things as you're walking along. You get dragged into somebody's classroom to take care of something. It doesn't always make it into the system. And some other just sort of operational things that we do, like account creation and whatnot. But that's about what it is. I tried to get that down to a per day, but it depended on what part of the year that was going to be. You know, a couple of days after summer school starts, it cools down a little bit. At the end of a semester when grading's up, goes up a little bit. The first 2 days back from our initial break in the pandemic into our first days of distance learning in 2020, oh yeah, it was a good 200, 250 calls a day. We stacked up that first day with about 400 calls in the queue just that came through over the weekend, I recall. So it varies greatly, just we'll say that. And then a little bit more just in terms of the numbers. If you go down and look at the devices, this is what we're dealing with in terms of the equipment, the inventory that's out with our students and staff. So we have about 375 laptops and desktops deployed in the system for our staff users. I'm not counting lab computers, although we've cut back on labs quite a bit, given that we're now a one-to-one district essentially, and everybody has a device in their hands. We have about 3,100 student devices available to our students during our distance learning. Those were all deployed. We're not necessarily doing one-to-one in daily classroom work anymore in the elementary schools, although I'm not sure that that is not happening in some of the classrooms. But we have enough devices available. Should we go to distance learning tomorrow, we can send everybody home with a device. So that's our fleet, so to speak. Back in our back rooms, in our data center, we've got 10 physical servers, and those are going down in number. We're kind of whittling those back a little bit more. And we have virtual servers that are going up in number. Virtual servers are served by 2 of those physical servers as hosts. But it gives us the ability to, when we need a new server, to spool one up really quickly in the virtual environment. It looks to all intents and purposes like it's a box on its own in the data center. So that's a lot of where we've directed some of our infrastructure over the past several years to get that running, certainly. We also have 6 video security servers. These are storing the video temporarily that gets pulled and gets served up to our users who are using video for various purposes, from investigations to just checking on seeing what might be happening in the cafeteria right now. And then for Wi-Fi access points, it's about 315 deployed throughout the district. Generally, we have one in every classroom and in large space areas as well. There are a few classrooms that might be sharing an access point where they're close together and where it could hit all of those. And I'm not going to hit every type of device we have in this district, but we'll just mention student hotspots. We have a fleet of about 150 of those that served us well during the pandemic. During the pandemic, almost all of those were deployed. Right now, maybe a third of them are in deployment. So those are the sorts of things that we work with. And the staff that we work with them, if you see up above, just giving you a profile of what they look like. This is my team. I'm going to say it's the best team I've ever worked with in my time managing technology, both back in the 90s and early 2000s, and then coming back to it again when I came here to South St. Paul. So I'm really proud of this group. Longevity, 29 years to 4 months. We have a couple of new people in our media centers. That number continues to go up as long as my longest lived person sticks on here, right? Most of my staff are parents, either of current students or recent graduates of South St. Paul schools. About 8 of my 13 staff, including myself in that staff list. The majority of them are women, and that was not the case in 2015 or 2016. I think 1 until I hired 2. No, 2 until I hired the 3rd, something along those lines. So we're liking that fact as well. Most of them live in South St. Paul or have lived in South St. Paul and are now living in some of the communities surrounding us. It's 11 of 13. I'm the outlier. I live in Hudson Township in Wisconsin, okay? And the other person who's not in South St. Paul is in Cottage Grove, which doesn't directly border it, so I didn't call it a surrounding community, but they're all close in and part of the community. And all really dedicated group of people. They're all Packers. And once again, proud to have them on the team. So I'll give you a view of how they're structured, just so you get a sense of how the department works. I have 3 broad areas that I've listed here: infrastructure, user support, and media operations, media center. And if we start at the top, under where I am at the Director of Technology level, we have a network manager who is primarily responsible for design and direction of the maintenance of our network and implementing new things. We have an IT systems specialist who is also working on infrastructure primarily, but also dips into user support. I should say that all of our staff wind up taking calls, working the help desk. Everybody's involved in user support to some degree. So, but this is just basically where people are specialized. We have 3 user support specialists. They're the core support team, and they are the primary part of the help desk. And you have probably met at least one of them in your work here. Brian was greeted by one of them as well, and they carry out most of our support. And working closely with them are tech media assistants at the elementary schools. They're our frontline help desk as well. Their positions are split between user support and media center operations. And that degree of division there varies depending on whether they're secondary or at the elementary schools, and that's why you might see their boxes kind of slipping up and down there between those 2 areas. We also have our digital learning team. Very proud of this group, and this group was front and center for us during the pandemic, certainly. Our digital learning coordinator, who also happens to be our 29-year employee. Digital learning specialist is Tosa, a teacher on special assignment. It's been in this position for a couple of years now. And our district media specialist, all parts of the digital learning team. You'll see a little bit about what they do coming on. And then we also run a print shop in the district, and so that is also in my department as well. We have a print services support person who runs the print shop, and also a lot of my user support people are able to go into the print shop and run jobs when he's on vacation or out sick, something like that. So I want to go into how we got to that position of having the staff the way it is right now. And the first thing I want to talk about is the change that happened in a period before we went to the pandemic here that got us to this new structure. That basically, back in 2010, when the department was basically organized the way I found it when I came in 2015, adults were pretty much the primary customers. And by adults, I mean adult staff members, not parents even. And what has happened since then, in 2017 and beyond, is that regular student users far outnumbered the adults as they started to be more active in technology, both in labs and starting to get into one-to-one programs. Student use of technology in 2010 was not a regular thing. It generally was scheduled and scripted and usually took place in a lab that had to be booked. So it didn't happen terribly frequently. Student technology became a daily expectation by 2017 and was supported by devices that were available to our students. And that's the next part down. We had a one-to-one program in 2010 that was in the works of planning for 1 grade level. By 2017, we'd expanded it for 6th through 10th grade or 12th grade. And then we also had started inroads into the elementary with one-to-one at 5th grade. That's where it was primarily until we got to the pandemic. And we were basically provisioning our students in elementary school with 1 device for every 2 students, a shared device model. We took a look in the mirror and we found some interesting things. Among others was, number 1, that we were spending far too much fixing problems rather than preventing them. And so we realized that we had to look at systems a little bit more than just intervening in those systems. I talked to my staff about it the way that we talk, or Chad might be talking to you about MTSS or RTI. The idea that if you're not at a point where 80% of your kids are being served well by the curriculum, you're not going to intervene your way out of that. You have to work on the system at that point, the core curriculum. And the same is true with technology. If 50% of your work is solving problems, then you're never going to get your way out of that unless you start working on the systems. So that's the way that's one of our realizations that we had as we were preparing to make some changes. The other thing we were looking at is that with our mission of personalization of learning and the work that would need to be done with teachers to accomplish that, and our focus on that, there was only 1 employee out of the 9 employees at that time in my department that had that as their job description. And that was only part of their job and the work that they were doing. So trying to beef up our staff to work in that area was going to be a primary thing. So we wound up running a study with the aid of an outside group, and they came through with a recommendation to restructure, to realign resources with our mission, and to realign our organization with where we were trying to get. What that led to is a restructuring in 2017 and 18, and I hope I only go through one of those majorly in my time. I heard I think our former superintendent said changing your student information system is a once-in-a-lifetime thing you want to do. I'm on my third one now, so, want to make it a little bit easier than that. But it involved, of course, replacing some positions, hiring and rehiring some people. We tried to increase our support for infrastructure. We also tried to focus more heavily on end-user support. And in the end, what we were able to do was a net reduction of positions that allowed us to finance a digital learning specialist and create a digital learning team. In the restructuring, we also brought the media specialist into the tech department, the district media specialist, and so we formed the team out of that group. And talking a little bit about what that group has done, and this is one of the most productive groups of employees I've ever worked with in terms of getting a task and immediately planning around it and getting it ready to execute. It's a digital learning coordinator, our digital learning specialist, and the district media specialist are parts of this group. Among the things that they did and have been doing is, number one, they designed the digital citizenship curriculum that we use in the elementary and the middle schools, got that framework going, and that's what the media technology teachers in the elementary schools took as their foundational framework to carry forward. But even more to the point, the work they did around blended learning was instrumental for us. They ran year-long cohorts for 3 years in which teachers and administrators got an intensive background in blended learning. They learned about the different models of blended learning, and they got time to develop units and lessons and implement them in their classrooms. And this is over a year. And then they came back and shared what they had done, and came back the next year and shared with the next cohort later on. So it was a wonderful experience, basically, that wound up over those 3 years. We graduated 25 of our teaching staff and administrators from that cohort. And that's a group that led us into the pandemic, actually. And we're kind of an anchor point for the pandemic and the work we did there. They also did a lot of breakout sessions on blended learning and during professional learning days, and did a lot of coaching with individual teachers and with teams. So probably all teaching staff in our district had some taste of what blended learning was before moving into the pandemic. And I'm sorry I didn't define blended learning. We've done it in the past, but not everybody got that definition, I know. But it's basically learning that is done partly in school and in a classroom, and partly on your own time, and sometimes your own place of choice. So you have a choice in time, pace, and place in blended learning for part of it. And what blended learning tries to do is to shift some of the things that can be done by students independently, things that teachers have been doing that can be moved into the students' realm to be responsible for, so that teachers have more time to work with small groups of students who need them. It is actually a system that we say can actually create time for teachers to spend more time with the students who need them the most. So I mentioned COVID and going into COVID, and we learned a lot of lessons from COVID. Certainly, I just wanted to tell you some of the things we learned and how that influences where we go forward. First of all, talked about professional learning with our blended learning, our digital learning team and blended learning. I think that paid off enormously for us in our work during the pandemic. The group of teachers formed a core of experience and a core of expertise that I think buildings relied on and teams relied on as they moved in. And so it helped quickly, it helped us greatly in terms of moving into distance learning when we did in that early April of 2020. So that was a key lesson, certainly. The other thing, and it seems certainly banal to say it, but be ready for emergencies, be ready for extended emergencies. We had prepared pretty well for a 1 or 2 day emergency closing. We didn't expect the rest of the school year or most of the next school year as closings for us. But it taught us to be ready for extension on those sorts of things. It took a lot of planning. It took a lot of stamina on everybody's part to get through our work doing distance learning over the past couple of years. But that's a lesson just to be learned from that. The other lesson comes in this, and quite often we like to say it's not really about the devices, it's about the students and the teachers and what they're doing with the devices, but it was actually about the devices during the pandemic. And it was about supply chain trouble, and it was about all those sorts of things. Typically, we could order our next year's Chromebooks mid to late April and have them by mid-May and have them all inventoried and ready to be deployed in the fall before I lose, a third of my staff to summer, right? We put our orders in March because we saw which way things were going. And one of the things that we knew was that even if we were back in the fall, there was no way we were going to have elementary kids sharing devices in a classroom during a pandemic. So we went for one-to-one across the boards, having enough devices for everybody. We put all of our orders in, and then we waited. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited. The week before school, we didn't have our main order of 600 devices, and we needed that to be able to do anything. We got an ETA of October 31st for delivery. But this is how wacky the supply chain was. I went to my supplier, where the folks that we purchased the devices from, and they went back to the manufacturer, and they couldn't get an answer from it, and that's where we got the October 31st. And we're thinking, we need a plan B. We were actually thinking, okay, I can buy 3 devices at a time at Best Buy. We all fan out different highways, hit every city in the Midwest. Each of us get, each one we buy 3 devices. We didn't have to go to that length. But about 2 days before panic time, I got a call from the FedEx warehouse in Lakeville saying, we have 600 devices here for you. My supplier didn't know about it. Hewlett-Packard didn't know about it. It came straight from China to Lakeville, apparently. So
Say I'm on my way.
it was crazy. Well,
Hold the door.
I thought I was going to spend the weekend. This is on a Friday. I thought I was going to spend the weekend at that warehouse parked in the parking lot, making sure nobody took my devices.
Right.
Right? But we didn't have to go there. They came, and it kind of saved the day for us. Not everybody got the device that was appropriate for their age, but everybody had a device home with them at the beginning of the pandemic. The rest of the devices for the elementary, well, we got some of them. The ones for second grade, those came early February. And a year after we placed the order, we canceled the one that we had in for our first graders and kindergartners, and luckily found a replacement device available with one of our suppliers. So,
For those, the touchscreens ones for the little ones?
touchscreen tablets for
Yeah.
little kids, yeah. So that's what the supply chain looked like.
Oh.
It has been up and down, up and down, up and down. The bonus was that this year, all the suppliers had bought so much, and the new models were coming out, that everything was at a discount and they had them available. So I was able to order all of next year's devices for about $50 less per device than I have ever paid for them in the past, and they were with us in 2 weeks.
Oh, that's great.
So that was good news, definitely.
No
I don't think-
stocking the FedEx parking lot this year? No.
No stock in the FedEx parking lot. Definitely not. The other thing that we found is that often our customers are not who we always expect them to be. For much of the pandemic, parents and guardians were our primary customers. They were the majority of our calls early on in distance learning and wound up being a presence all the way through. We found ourselves serving our parents and guardians far more directly than we ever had in the past. And then the final part was we had to learn the art of how to support remote staff. When we had remote staff, I think the only remote staff we had in the past was some of our ABE teachers who were teaching in West St. Paul and never really came into the district. But then they didn't interact a whole lot with our network. But now everybody was remote at some points. And that required a real leveling up of our skills of support as a department. So that was our kind of romp through pandemic land. Just a couple of notes here about current and future directions, some of them informed by our experience, and some of them taking care of things that were kind of deferred by the pandemic in terms of that. Most of our efforts, once again, during the pandemic were about moving devices out, delivering them to houses, into shelters, repair of devices, getting them back into the field. And so we've got some room now to take care of other things. We're looking at classroom displays again. We were on the march for that before the pandemic. In fact, when River Heights came on board, when CLC moved up, we converted them from projectors to LED displays with wireless display. And that's served them well at this point, and this looks like a direction that we will be moving on with. We still have to identify some interactive displays for the next model. Our current smart boards are aging out, and that's a rather expensive system to replace, but we're looking at some other options for interactive display where interactive display is needed. We're also looking at some selective cloud migration. Now, you can't watch TV without seeing commercials about the cloud transforming everybody's business, making things cheaper, making things more efficient. Doesn't happen that way. So we looked at phones first. Our phone system is aging, and we still have a few years in it as it is probably, but we did some initial exploration on moving our phones to the cloud. Sounds like a great idea. Sounds like it should be cheaper. It's only about 3.5 times more expensive year on year than just keeping it in-house. So we had a lot of cloud price shock taking place as we were looking at some of these. But we've been doing some selective cloud migration, mostly moving applications into the cloud. We're doing one right now, our library system Destiny. We're about halfway through it. By tomorrow, it should be fully done. For a lot of applications, you cannot house data internally anymore. They don't want you to. Or run their applications internally. They want to run it on their servers because it makes it easier for them to support. And the good news about that is quite often, is the case with this Destiny example, it's a no-cost conversion to the cloud. So it's better for all parties, vendor and us, and winds up not costing us anything to do that. We also learned during the pandemic that when everybody's remote and their passwords expire, it's chaos at that point, because you do have to be in our system right now on our network to change a password directly. So that's one thing that we've been looking at for the past couple of years, and we are going to execute it here this spring, of having off-site self-service password management as a thing for us. It's going to involve a little bit more infrastructure, but I think we can do that. We're also in the process, and have been for a couple of years, of moving our content onto the cloud through our current subscriptions with Google and Microsoft. Those include cloud space. It's not systematic, it's more user-based, but I refer to it as the poor man's cloud sometimes. And it will free up some space where we don't have to buy more hardware internally to replace hardware that we currently have that might be aging out. And the final thing is around security, and this is a need that is not related to the pandemic, but is a security need, and it's actually a requirement for us to get cyber insurance at this point. Multi-factor authentication. It's the annoying thing where you have to, at your bank, use your password and then get a text code and get them both in. But that is coming our way too soon. And so it'll be by July 1st that we should have that in place. So it will affect just our staff.
Oh, okay.
And you'll be a part of that too.
Great.
Okay? So that's what we've been up to for the past several years. And that's some of the areas that we are moving towards in the future in the next couple of years as well. So I'd leave it open to you at this point for questions that you might have of me.
I've got a couple. So you kind of alluded to this when you were talking about ordering next year's computers. How often do we switch out laptops, Chromebooks?
If we're talking about Chromebooks, student Chromebooks, we tend to not have a fixed time to do that. What we do know for a Chromebook is if it's out on a one-on-one for like the secondary going home, it's got an average lifespan of 4 years.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Some will go 5, some will go 6, some will be replacing in year 1.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what that generally looks like. So what we do right now, we've standardized on our model largely. It changes generation by generation, but we use an HP model that has been sturdy and really reliable. And the other thing is that what we've standardized on is that all of our Chromebook fleet, whether it's tablets in the elementaries or the other touch device that we use in second grade, or it's at the high school, they all use the same chargers and the same charging methodology, so we don't have to worry about who has which one, and is there going to be a charger available for them all, those sorts of things. So it's more about just buying more stock every year and deploying it where it's needed.
Got it. Great. And then you had talked about your specialists, your staff. Do you have any Spanish-speaking staff? Just because I was thinking when you were saying, parents were your biggest customer group, how would that work if folks spoke a different language?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we do have our cultural liaisons in the district who will help us quite a bit on that, and they will bring people in on calls, or we can get them in on calls. We do have one Spanish-speaking, native-speaking employee in the district, or employee in our department.
And then I know that for many of us during the superintendent search, your team was totally integral to us getting set up so that we could have questions ready, data sent out immediately once it was inputted for the folks who were giving us information, in the interviews themselves, and having that readily available. So it was a huge, I think that made the process a lot easier. I didn't expect it to be seamless the way that it was, so thank your team. And because of how easy that was, we have a new superintendent sitting here. So thank you.
Well, I'll pass that on to my team.
Please do.
Yes.
I think we don't forget, other people had a hand in getting that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Well-
huge hand.
And I hope my team would just say, yeah, I was just doing my job.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure they would.
I'm sure they would. But those were late nights. They were late nights, and they were there. So we appreciate it.
Anybody else? Couple things. The hotspots you mentioned, those are used for, help me out here, students that maybe don't have Wi-Fi at home, and then they can take a
Yeah.
hotspot and use that. Is that-
Exactly. It's for students who don't have internet access at
Okay.
home, whether wired or wireless.
And they're just 50 in use now, you said?
Currently, there are about 50 in use.
Okay,
At the peak of the pandemic, we had 150 in use.
got it,
Yeah.
got it. And then the blended learning cohorts, are those still going on, or do they even need to go on anymore?
Well, we have to reevaluate that. We stopped
Okay.
them right before the pandemic, partly because we were having such substitute difficulties even before the pandemic.
Oh, sure.
In the final year, we tried to do some cohorts that didn't require subs. It's a tough thing to do because the program and the idea is you're doing it through a year,
yeah.
getting regular coaching, getting regular feedback, experimenting, coming back, reporting on your experiments. So it's important that it go through a school year the way we had it designed. But we do have to reevaluate that and how we do that. It was a fairly sub-intensive process.
Sure. All right, well, please keep us posted on that.
I will do that.
Thank you so much for coming and presenting tonight.
Yeah,
Indeed.
Thank you.
great
you, Paul.
information, Paul.
We appreciate your support. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
you.
Paul.
We did have, moving on to our report section, we did have one public listening session or submission this week. It was a personnel issue, so it wasn't anything that we could do publicly, and that was redirected to Superintendent Zambrino. And next on the list of our reports are Superintendent Brent Zambrino and Finance Director Brady Hoffman to highlight our 2023 budget planning and proposed budget adjustments.
All right, well, thank you, Chair Diaz. While Brady's getting set up, yes, we did want to have an opportunity to have some discussion here in this setting around the budget planning that's been going on. As I think the board is well aware, but maybe some of our listeners may not know, that work was well underway prior to me coming in. So we're just kind of landing the initial budget planning that will help us then move into staffing and the decisions that need to be made at the sites. And so I've asked Brady to walk through the presentation that you've all seen, have an opportunity for our public to hear the great work that's gone on. The lead teams worked really hard to make sure that we're prioritizing keeping staff in the classrooms with our students and maintaining our small class sizes, though there are some difficult decisions that we do have ahead just because of budget constraints that all districts seem to be facing this year. I'll let Brady jump in.
All right. Let's see if this thing turned on. There we go. All right, so an update on our FY23 budget planning. We're going to walk through our guiding change document. This is the document that the board gives input and direction on how we carry out our budget process, what we focus on, what we things to avoid through that. We'll look at the assumptions that play into our FY23 budget. We'll touch on the proposed adjustments and then talk about next steps. So the guiding change document on the screen here is an overarching document that we use in the budget process. The first column on the left is our context and reality, the why we're doing this work. It's including things such as state funding doesn't keep pace with inflation. We have declining enrollment. 80% of our cost is people, salaries, and benefits, so the reality of where the district is. The far right column is the results or the desired outcomes of the process. So things such as establishing a budget that maintains an unrestricted fund balance of 11%, considering additions, reductions, and redesign, and striving for equity in all that we do. The middle column is our not hows, the non-negotiable things that we can't do. We can't break laws, we can't violate policies, we can't bring forth things that aren't sustainable, and then within this is also programs we can't substantially reduce, such as the arts or athletics and activities. So this is an overarching document that we use through the budget process as a district leadership team as we're evaluating budget options as we move forward. Some of the basic assumptions that come into our budget. The basic formula allowance, so on the revenue side, the basic formula allowance, whenever you hear the state is giving a 2% increase in funding for schools, that's the basic formula allowance. That's not all of our revenue, that's just a portion of it that we receive on a per pupil basis. That's determined by the state on a 2-year cycle, so we know for next year we're getting 2%, but for FY24 and beyond, it's up in the air at this point. So in these projections, we are assuming 2% as well. The state has a surplus and they've had a consistent theme of giving 2%, so we're using that as well in our projection. Compensatory revenue, this is a funding stream that's generated by concentration of educational benefits and where those applications are. We did see a decrease with the pandemic. Less applications are being completed, so our funding actually went down. We had a big push this year and those were completed and we're back up to $3 million of revenue. So that was about a $500,000 increase going into next year that it has helped us in the budget process. COVID relief federal funding, there's been several different funding streams that have come through as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, providing additional resources to school districts. This is one-time money, so it's not ongoing year over year, but we did get some influx of federal funding with different restrictions and requirements, but it's being utilized over the next 2 years to help offset budget reductions that would otherwise had to have been made. And then another revenue stream that we had coming in this year is we sold the Jefferson property to the city for $1 million. So we're using those also as one-time money to help buy, maintain staff and resources within our system over the next 2 years. On the expenditure side, so overall, on average, our expenses go up about 2.5%. As I said before, about 80% of our costs are people, salaries, and benefits. So those are, so we incorporate things, known settlements, steps, lane changes, just the inflation market that can happen with TRA and PRA and those things. Our costs go up as people get paid, work their way up the salary schedule. And then there's non-salary items. Some things we can control, some things we can't. Utilities, we can't really control what those rates are doing. We need to heat our buildings, we need to do those things. Transportation costs, driver shortages, those things, we have to follow the market as well. So when we factor in some of those adjustments, that's where we come into about a 2.5% increase in expense. The other big driver in our budget projection is enrollment. So we have been facing declining enrollment for the past few years, and that's projected to continue here for the next 5 years or so. So looking at our enrollment projection, we peaked back in the 2016-17 school year at just over 3,500 students. And as you can see, those dark blue bars show how we've incrementally stepped down the last few. That checkered bar is our current projection of 3,032 students. So that's about 70 students less than prior year. As we project out, we're projecting to go down to 2,932 next year and then continue to step down over the next several years after that. A big reason for the decline is we have larger class sizes going through our secondary right now than we have coming in as kindergarten in our elementary grades. So we've got 230, 240 kids in the secondary grade levels and 200, 210, 220 in the lower grade levels. So as those larger class sizes graduate, they aren't being replaced by the same number of kindergartners coming in. So it's a natural decline in enrollment that we're having to navigate through the system. So when we take the revenue assumptions of the state formula, the federal funding that we're receiving, when we look at those expenditure assumptions and rolling up those costs, and then we factor in enrollment, those are some of the big underlying pieces that come together to make this, to show this projection. So what this slide is showing, so that first column in blue is where we actually ended the last fiscal year. So we had a deficit spend about $247,000, so that's the variance line listed there, for an ending fund balance of just over $5.2 million, or 11.91 unrestricted fund balance. Our current year is the red column, and that's where we're budgeted pretty much about the same spot. Our budget is going to spend down about another $250,000, which will have us at just over 11% unrestricted fund balance. So now when we apply that 2% increase in the general ed formula with declining enrollment and using some of those federal dollars, our revenues go down slightly to $41.7 million. When we take that 2.5% and roll up all of our costs and continue those forward, our expenses go up to over $43 million. So that's resulting in the need to make some type of adjustments in order to maintain that 11% fund balance and to maintain that, being fiscally responsible with our resources. So that's an adjustment of about $1.4 million that we're trying to accomplish here. So when we take that $1.4 million, when we're going down about 100 students. If we get roughly $10,000 per student, that's $1 million. When we talk about the inflation piece, so the expenses going up at a rate faster than the state revenue, there's an inflation gap. So on an annual basis, we're looking at $400,000 or $500,000 of reductions just because of inflation. So we've got $1 million for declining enrollment, add another $400,000 for the inflation, and that's kind of how that number comes together. So as we trend this out with declining enrollment the next couple of years, you can see the second year as well is looking at another $1.4 million. And that's when we run out of these ESSER funds, the COVID relief funds, those federal dollars, and that's what creates what some places are calling a fiscal cliff, where we get out to FY25, and that's where we're looking at a $3.5 million cut. So declining enrollment's part of it, state not keeping pace with inflation, and then we've had this influx of federal money that's helped us maintain staffing and maintain supports within our systems that otherwise wouldn't be there. So a couple years out, there's a lot of moving parts coming through this too. There's money at the state level that they're talking about. Do we provide more relief for the cross subsidy with special ed? Do we, equalization is a topic that's really important to us and our taxpayers. So there's things in the works at the legislature that hopefully come to fruition, but those are all things that we'll be working on here over the next 2 years as we approach that FY25 fiscal year. So we look at the budget adjustment, so that $1.4 million for the FY23 budget. This first line item on here showing the original budget shows that 41.7 of revenue, the 43.1 of expense for that net spend down of 1.4 million. So if we do nothing, our fund balance goes down to 7.8%, and then it just kind of makes that hole that much deeper to dig out of in the future. So to maintain that 11.1%, here's the listing of some of the recommendations coming forward. So that first line item of aligning staffing to enrollment is, as you have declining enrollment, there's less students in the system, so it's reducing staff to maintain those same ratios. So we're keeping the same class size norms, so I have the same number of students per adult within our buildings. So those are just kind of that alignment as enrollment changes. We're utilizing that ESSER funding, that's some of that COVID-19 relief money that hadn't been allocated yet. We're utilizing that to save more positions that otherwise would have been reduced. So this is helping us maintain those class sizes and maintaining more systems and supports within our buildings. The next line item is a redesign of our Director of Equity and Early Learning. So we had a retirement in that position. Our Director of Equity and Early Learning retired. So we use this as an opportunity to look at that position and those needs and restructure within. And so we did not replace that director, but instead we created an assistant director and we moved equity within our learning department. And then we took all the early learning components and that coordinator and shifted that underneath community ed. So community ed now owns the early learning work, and then the equity work has shifted over to our Director of Learning and Equity. So now there's a director and an assistant director in that arena as well. So we've shifted that workload and provided supports within, and that's resulting in some budget savings as well, if that helps with some of that alignment through this process. The next line item is an additional draw from our OPEB trust. So OPEB is our other post-employment benefits. So within a lot of our contracts, when employees retire, they receive ongoing post-employment health benefits that the district pays a portion of. So we do have a trust with about $5 million in it, where we were able to set money aside through issuing bonds to pay these liabilities that otherwise would have been coming out of the general fund. So that trust has been operating really well, and so that benefit of those resources is still sitting there. So we're going to use an additional $100,000 as needed to help cover some of those post-employment costs that the general fund would otherwise be paying. And then our last item on here for employee retirements and the savings that comes with that. So when employees retire, typically they're seasoned and they've been higher up the pay scale than where a new person comes in. So there's an inherent savings with the replacement coming in. So on average, we save about $100,000 a year with that natural attrition that happens within our system. So the combination of using ESSER funds with the reductions identified here gets us that $1.4 million and a projection that comes in at 11.1% of that unrestricted fund balance. So from here, later on in the agenda is the recommendation for the board to consider for approval. Once approved from there, the administration will continue to develop the inner workings and the details of these budgets. We'll work through all the staffing in the much more precise way to get all the people in the right places, and then come with the full budget details in June. So per statute, the school board is required to adopt a budget for the next fiscal year by June 30th. So more updates will be coming, more presentations, more information as we work through this process to get to the full final budget here in June. So that is our update on the FY23 budget planning. So from there, I'll open up for any questions or any other comments.
We've seen it a couple times, so I think we got all of our questions out. Yeah, I think we're good. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you, Brady.
Thanks, Brady.
Down here. All right. And welcome to Superintendent Zambrino for your very first superintendent report.
I'm excited. And, this, as part of this report, we come and provide updates about what's happening in the district. So turns out one of the biggest highlights of what's going on is that there's a new superintendent. So,
Surprise!
Yeah, surprise. And so I did share with you all my entry plan to highlight, this is not the typical start date. We've all talked about that, but typically you start in July and come in and kind of get that opportunity to meet with folks. Here, kind of needing to do that while we're also moving through all these end of year pieces like the budget we just heard about. But I did share that with you all. I did send my entry plan directly to all the staff for me so they could see that. And then this amazing person over here helped us get that out to all of our families. So it's been shared out, but wanted to highlight some of the pieces within that entry plan and how it's shaping the work that I'm doing as I'm coming on. So using that approach of listen, learn, and lead. So really getting to hear from our stakeholders, a wide variety of stakeholders, learn about the district, and then figuring out what we need to do to move the district and propel us forward. So one of the first items we had was to work with you all on establishing our working relationship. Some of the folks who maybe aren't in the inner works may not know, but there's been a long relationship with TeamWorks International, working with the board and its role of governance, and then the superintendent and team in that role in management. So working on that working relationship and then establishing our communication protocols around that. So we've begun that work. And then a couple other pieces. The next two goals were to learn from stakeholders again about the history of the district, our strengths, our challenges, areas of improvement, and then also on getting an understanding of our district systems, structures, and key initiatives. So I've had an opportunity to meet with our building leaders, our district leaders, with you all, with one lunch still tomorrow, so almost there. Have a lunch scheduled with Mayor Francis, and so working through just getting connected with all of our key stakeholders to hear from everybody. Really what I want to be able to do is gather information that, again, will drive the work we're going to do moving forward. So what that's looked like, I've had an opportunity to get out to all the buildings. One of the first visits I got to do was to Lincoln Center. What an amazing school. All of our schools, I should say. Absolutely amazing. The evidence of relationships between our students with each other and the staff and our students. You can just see it and feel it everywhere. I know it's been a hard year with the pandemic, but I don't want anyone to lose sight of that. I've been in a lot of schools, as you know, from all the things I shared in the interview process, and what I've seen is just incredible. So while there was fun, I got to walk into Principal Starkman walked me through every classroom. So she's like, are we going to be able to do this? And we got through enough, and I'm like, we better keep going, because if anybody feels like we didn't come to theirs, I don't want anybody feeling left out, students or staff. And it was really fun, just the number of different things we saw. We had walked into one room and they were just getting ready to give the students awards for doing extra math work. And so she and I got to present those with the teacher to the students. You know my background, I worked with students with disabilities, and I mean, there's so many nooks and crannies in that building if you've been through the building, but one of the ones that just blew me away was the gym for our adaptive PE for our students with disabilities. Often I've seen that happen like in a hallway where it's a DAPE teachers, we call them, the adaptive PE teacher out in the hallway with kids in like one hockey stick, and they're just in the hallway. Like they have this whole setup there, all this adaptive equipment. So it's just really neat to see the care and concern given to our students. Kaposia, similar situation. It was fun days. You've seen the picture. It was St. Patrick's Day, so the kids were and staff were aglow with you know, the pride in that. It was kind of funny as I'm meeting a lot of the staff with the green danglies on their head. I don't normally dress like this, but I'm like, hey, I love it because we need to be having fun in our schools. We're coming off of a pandemic. Like love and fun need to be central to our work, and so seeing that there was a neat thing. And they had when I went back to, I did go to all the staff meetings as well, or had a staff meeting to talk to staff. And when I went there, they had the Sunshine Committee putting on a spread that a staff member leaving. It was Principal Britoy's birthday. So just the love is palpable in all of our schools, but certainly felt that there. I know we have our middle school principal here tonight. Always fun visiting a middle school. You never know what you're gonna see. Pretty cool structure where they got the kids, you know, separated out, because obviously for parents, when you're in that big building, like our baby's gonna be safe in there, and they've got a really well-structured system for keeping the kids in the houses, as I know them. It's kind of like with the grade levels. But we were walking around, and the kids are always so curious, like, who is that, and what are you? So then it was like, it's the superintendent. Well, what does that mean? And I was kind of like, oh, that's a good question. Like, how do you explain that? And I was sharing different things with them, and I said to one of them, I'm like, well, I'm still learning about this job because now I have 7 bosses. And he's like, huh. I was like, well, I kind of have a lot of bosses. Like, at home, I got my parents, I got my principal, I got all these teachers, so it was fun to see them making those connections, but always, you know, curious. Our middle schoolers are always curious at that age. And then also got to visit the high school. Again, our students, what stands out to me, relationships and just the maturity that they show, and the care for one another. In all of our sites, I've seen, I know when I first came to the first meeting, you were lifting the mask mandates. I've seen staff wearing, some staff and some students with that recommendation, but everybody just accepting each other for who they are, whether it's the mask or who you are as an individual person. Fun highlight that maybe some people don't know that stands out for someone new with that new lens is just seeing all the graduates from the whole history of the high school picture there, and just a lot of pride and tradition that you can see in all of our sites. I should note that in everywhere I went, everybody made a point to let me know they were born here, raised here, graduated from here, work here, and I'm like, I love that pride. I'll never be able to say that, but I'm a Packer now, so we all know once a Packer, always a Packer. Moving forward, as we kind of continue through the year, we have all the end-of-year activities, so we have banquets and different things coming up, and then, of course, commencement. I can't wait to see it. I've heard about how the students walk out and that. I know last year was like 100 degrees, so I'm praying it's not. If it is, no, I'll be sweating, but that's okay. I'll still be smiling with pride for our kids. And then with this group, as we get to the end of the year, what I'd like to do is be thinking about what are the goals you have for me. So we'll set goals for me as we move into my second contract in July. So we'll work on goals there, and then thinking about goals we want to set for the district. So I'll come back and share out information that I've heard from all the stakeholders. There's already key themes starting to emerge. Those of you who sat with me know I'm sitting with my keyboard so I can just take copious notes on the things people are saying. So excited about that as we do our collective work moving forward. And then again, the entry plan was sent out to our stakeholders, but it is online. So if anybody wanted to pop in, if they didn't get that, it is available on our district's website, and anyone can take a peek. Other highlights going on, our boys basketball team, one of my first days on the job. And the conference game that I'll tell you what, boy, and I'm going to call them men because they played like men on that. I mean, they got behind and they fought and pulled up to tying it up with the final seconds. Unfortunately, the fates weren't in our favor that night, and I'm sure that the young men are reeling still from that loss, but I know that once they recover from that, they're going to realize how special that season was and what it meant to the community. So it's fun to be a part of that. I wish we would have gotten to continue that forward. Our high school theater put on the production of the Laramie Project. I got to watch that on Saturday. My wife Karina came with me, and she's one who gets emotional when we're watching movies and things. She's like, I think I'm going to cry on this. And I'm like, I think from what I've heard, you will. And it was moving. I mean, the story itself, but the way our students deliver that. We have some amazingly talented actors, and of course our director for that production. And then wanted to highlight, we have coming up, it doesn't feel like it after this weekend, it was so cold, but we're coming up on summer, and so wanted to make sure our families are aware. Summer Learning Academy is there for students in grades 1 through 5. That'll run July 20th to 28th, Monday to Thursday. And so they can enroll. The information is there at our website with the Summer Learning 2022. So great opportunity to continue learning. We know that a lot of folks were worried about the learning loss that kids have had, so here's a great opportunity to continue learning and not have that summer slip or regression of anything. A couple important dates. It is spring break now, so hopefully our staff and students are having fun or resting or whatever they need to do. April 28th is our high school family connection, so the conferences, that's coming up. I know the high school will get more information out to families on that, but wanted to highlight that. And then just for folks to know, if you're looking for materials related to these meetings, always can go to our website, click on the district, and then our school board, and that's where you can find all of these meetings, agendas, and minutes. And so those are some of the highlights going on around the district.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to our consent agenda. And I am looking for a motion for the approval of our consent items.
So moved.
Thanks, Chris.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Under policy review, we didn't have any policies up for review this meeting. So moving on to our business items. I'm looking for a motion to approve the South St. Paul School Board, to approve the 2022-2023 proposed budget adjustments as presented. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second?
Wonderful. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries.
And can I just jump in there? Just thank you for that. We have a lot of hard work. Next steps will be working on the staffing implications. So in future board meetings, we'll come back and just be sharing, the steps we're taking and any implications for staff. So that will definitely be an ongoing conversation, but that allows us to get down and right into the work. So thank you for that.
Great. Looking for a motion to approve the Education, Identity, and Access Management Resolution.
So moved.
Thanks, Wendy.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion. Dr. Zambrino.
Yeah, thank you. So in EduSpeak, we always have to come up with a lot of acronyms. So the one on the table tonight is Identified Official with Authority, so Iowa, which would allow, passing this resolution will allow me to assign delegates in for the Minnesota Department of Education, Office of Higher Ed, as well as Pellsby, which is our licensing board. So needing to make some updates. We've had a lot of, as you know, changes in leadership and some need to update that information and assign people with the ability to do the authorized work by those various entities. So Iowa, new way to think about Iowa, but hopefully we can do that so we can move the work forward.
Great, thanks for explaining. And because it is a resolution, we have to call the roll. Lisa, can you please call the roll?
Inspector Walker?
Yes.
Inspector Weber?
Yes.
Inspector Lalaberty,
Yes.
Inspector Arndt,
Yes.
Inspector Felton,
Yes.
Chair Diaz.
Yes.
That's 6 yeas.
Motion carries. So that is it for our business items tonight, so we'll move on to the board member reports. And we can start down there with Wendy.
I just want to wish everyone a safe and enjoyable, fun spring break. Hopefully, unfortunately, the weather isn't going to be real warm for us. We're supposed to get snow coming up in a day or two. But I just want everyone to relax, enjoy, and be safe. Thank you.
Oh, that snow won't last.
No.
But same message here. Just everybody's been working so hard for years now through all the pandemic, and it's nice to have the week off. Hope everyone enjoys it and has a chance to relax and refresh.
Great, thanks.
I took a class at Central Square one day last week, and it's the first time I had been in there since the school district took over the community center. And I just want to say thank you to Jean Zinder and her staff for what they have done to make that such a welcoming place. Seniors are so happy with things that have happened, the people that I've talked with, and, you know, that they have coffee there for you, and there's classrooms and, you know, just lots of activities and people coming and going, and I just can't thank them enough for what they have done and have accomplished in a rather short amount of time to make that a place where people feel like they really belong. So thank you for that.
I have one item. My son and I saw the Laramie Project on Thursday, opening night. I just want to say how important that message is that kids delivered. It was about love and how big love can be and how love can change. So the weight of what they carried, I don't think they knew the weight of the message that they were conveying to the audience. They may have noticed when everybody went to Heritage Hall to greet them in the end, and there were tears all over, like that was just so powerful, that I think they went, wow, we did amazing work. They were just stunned. So thank you for taking that on and giving such a great message. Monica.
Yeah, I also saw the Laramie Project on opening night, and yeah, it was a powerful performance, and I just want to thank all the actors. I want to thank all, Mr. Holson and the great, team that he has working with him, everyone who worked on the show. It was just extremely well done. And the people sitting in front of me were not from South St. Paul, and they stood up and they looked at each other and they're like, wow, what a great performance for a school district to put on. And they're like, wow, we need to do this in our school and we need to continue spreading this message. And I didn't get to ask them where they were from, but I did overhear that. And so just hats off really for a fantastic performance.
Mr. Aaron.
Mr. Aaron, I want to give a shout out to the men's basketball team. And it was a super special season, the best I've seen since 1954 when I started watching basketball. And in case anybody didn't know or aren't a sports fan, this was a game that's a once-in-a-lifetime experience for me in that somebody won, but nobody lost. Mm-hmm. And I was so proud of the poise and maturity that our boys showed. I want to give a shout-out to not only the players, the managers, the coaches, the supervisors, everybody involved. I was so proud of. I've always been a Packer, a proud Packer. Now I'm even prouder. And way to go! And thanks for all the excitement this year. I don't know when we'll duplicate it again, but it was worth it this year. And one last shout out, go Packers!
For sure. So that's it for our agenda tonight, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our Monday, March 28th, 2022 meeting.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? That motion carries, and the meeting's adjourned at 7:04 PM. Thank you.